Anita's fingers clawed desperately at her throat as she collapsed onto the hardwood hallway floor. "I can't," she rasped, barely able to force the words through the tightening in her airway. Instead of rushing toward her, Gloria Brooks folded her arms. "Oh, not this again," she said with a dismissive laugh. "You're just seeking attention." Across the room, Anita's brother-in-law, Derek, didn't even look concerned. He leaned against the wall, shaking his head. "Seriously, every family dinner has to become about you somehow." Annita tried pointing toward her purse by the front door. Inside was the emergency epinephrine injector she never went anywhere without. Her hand trembled violently before dropping back to the floor. Her lips tingled. The room began spinning. Her husband, Ethan, took one uncertain step toward her. "Mom, maybe we should." Gloria cut him off. "Don't encourage this nonsense. The second someone mentions an ambulance, she'll suddenly feel better." Every breath became shorter than the last. Annita could hear every voice around her, but they sounded farther away, as though she were sinking underwater. A sharp wheeze escaped her chest. Derek rolled his eyes. "Look at her. She's waiting for someone to comfort her." Then a woman's voice echoed from outside the open front door. "Is somebody okay in there?" The shouting had reached the neighbors. Less than 4 minutes later, 2 paramedics rushed through the entrance carrying emergency equipment. The lead paramedic knelt beside Annita, took one look at her swollen face and rapidly darkening lips, and his expression changed instantly. "Epinephrine, now." As his partner reached for the injector, he slowly lifted his head and looked around the room. Nobody appeared frightened. Nobody was trying to help. Instead, several family members stood watching as though this were an inconvenience. His eyes briefly stopped on an untouched dinner plate sitting on the dining table. Then he looked back at Gloria. "What happened here?" Gloria shrugged. "She's always dramatic." The paramedic stared at her for another second before quietly speaking into his radio. "Dispatch, send law enforcement to this address." The words were calm, but they changed the atmosphere inside the house immediately. The oxygen mask settled over Anita's face as medication finally began opening her airway. Every breath still burned, but tiny pockets of air were finally reaching her lungs. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The second paramedic checked her pulse while asking quick questions. "Known allergies." Annita tried answering, but only fragments came out. "A food. A injector. A bag." His partner retrieved the injector from her purse. "It's still capped," he said quietly. He looked back toward the family. "Why wasn't this used?" No one answered immediately. Gloria finally sighed dramatically. "Because she didn't need it." The paramedic's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, she's in severe respiratory distress." "I've known her for years," Gloria replied. "Every little problem becomes a performance." Annita wanted to scream that this wasn't true. She had spent years avoiding conflict with Ethan's family. Every criticism had been met with silence. Every insult had been swallowed to keep peace. She worked as a respiratory therapist. She knew exactly what was happening to her own body. She also knew she was terrifyingly close to losing consciousness. Outside, flashing emergency lights reflected across the windows. Neighbors had begun gathering on the sidewalk, whispering as they watched the stretcher being wheeled inside. Ethan stood frozen. His eyes moved between his struggling wife and his mother. Years of believing Gloria's judgments fought against the horrifying reality unfolding in front of him. The lead paramedic glanced once more at the dining table. The plate in front of Annita was barely touched. A serving bowl sat nearby. His attention lingered there just long enough to notice something that didn't fit. He quietly asked another paramedic not to move the food. Moments later, the sound of another siren approached. This one wasn't an ambulance. A police cruiser pulled into the driveway. As 2 officers stepped through the front door, Confusion spread across every face in the room. Even Gloria looked genuinely surprised. One officer looked at the paramedic. "You requested us." He nodded once. "Yes." The officer followed his gaze toward the dinner table, then toward Annita, then back to the silent family. No one in the room yet understood why a medical emergency had suddenly become a police matter. 3 hours earlier, Annita had stood outside Gloria Brooks' front door holding a small dessert she'd baked herself. She took one slow breath before ringing the bell. Family dinners at Gloria's house always required preparation, not because of the food, but because of the tension. The door swung open. "There you are," Gloria said without a smile. "You're 10 minutes late." Annita glanced at the dashboard clock in her mind. They were actually 3 minutes early. "I'm sorry if traffic." Gloria waved a hand dismissively. "Come in. Everyone else managed to arrive on time." Annita stepped inside anyway. Correcting Gloria would only start another argument. The dining room was already buzzing with conversation. Derek looked up from the sofa. "Oh, look," he joked. "Our guest of honor finally made it." A few relatives laughed politely. Annita smiled weakly. "I'm sorry to disappoint." Gloria immediately frowned. "You always have an excuse." Ethan gently squeezed Anita's hand. "Just ignore it." She nodded. Ignoring it had become her survival strategy. As everyone settled into casual conversation, Gloria walked between the kitchen and dining room, directing everyone like a commander. "Derek, set the glasses." "Linda, move those flowers." "Ethan, help your uncle." Then she looked directly at Annita. "You can stay out here." The words sounded harmless. The tone wasn't. Annita had married into the family 4 years earlier, yet Gloria never treated her like family. She was tolerated, never accepted. A little later, the smell of dinner drifted from the kitchen. Anita's stomach tightened. She quietly followed Gloria. "Can I ask something?" "What now?" "I just wanted to double-check." She spoke carefully. "The sauce, does it contain tree nuts?" Gloria didn't even turn around. "No." "You're sure?" Gloria finally looked over her shoulder. "Annita, honestly." She sighed dramatically. "I've been cooking longer than you've been alive." "I know, I just have to be careful." "I already told you it's fine." Annita smiled politely. "Thank you." She wanted to believe her. Everyone in the family knew about her allergy. It wasn't a preference. It wasn't an intolerance. It was documented in hospital records, carried on a medical bracelet, and listed in her phone's emergency information. As a respiratory therapist, she'd educated countless patients about severe allergic reactions. She never expected she'd have to keep reminding her own family. Dinner was finally served. Gloria placed a plate in front of Annita herself. "There. I even made yours separately." Derek laughed. "Special treatment again." "It's hardly special," Annita answered quietly. "I just don't want to stop breathing." Derek chuckled. "Everybody's allergic to something these days." Gloria nodded. "Exactly." Then she added with a thin smile. "Sometimes I think people enjoy having something wrong with them." The room fell awkwardly quiet. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Mom." "What?" Gloria replied. "I'm just talking." Annita picked up her fork. Something caught her attention. The sauce looked slightly darker than usual. "Did you change the recipe?" Gloria answered almost too quickly. "No." Then, strangely, she added, "Why are you interrogating dinner?" Annita blinked. "I wasn't. You always assume someone's trying to poison you." A few nervous laughs spread around the table. Annita felt heat rise into her face. "I'm sorry." She lowered her eyes and took the first bite. Across the room, Aunt Linda frowned. She'd been helping set the table earlier. For just a second, she remembered seeing Gloria quietly replacing one serving bowl with another after everyone had left the dining room. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it. Now she wasn't so sure. Only a few minutes passed before Annita felt something wasn't right. Her tongue tingled. Then her throat. She reached for her water. Her hand shook slightly. Ethan noticed. "You okay?" She whispered. "My throat feels." Before she could finish, Gloria interrupted. "Oh, here we go." Annita looked up, confused. "I don't think." "It's anxiety," Gloria declared. "You always get anxious before family dinners." "It's not anxiety." Gloria folded her arms. "You've convinced yourself something's wrong again." Annita swallowed painfully. The pressure inside her throat was getting worse. She knew exactly what the symptoms meant. She also knew every passing minute mattered. She pushed back her chair. "I think I need." Gloria's voice cut through the room before anyone else could move. "Nobody is calling an ambulance over another one of your episodes." Annita barely made it 2 steps before her knees buckled. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the hardwood floor. She hit the hallway hard, one hand clutching her throat as every attempt to inhale produced only a strained, desperate wheeze. "Ethan." It came out as little more than a whisper. He rushed halfway toward her. "Annita." Before he could kneel beside her, Gloria stepped in front of him. "Leave her alone." He stared at his mother in disbelief. "Moms, look at her." "I am looking at her," Gloria replied coolly. "She's done this before. The second everyone starts fussing over her, she'll be perfectly fine." Annita reached toward her purse by the front door, her fingers trembling violently. She couldn't force out the words. The epinephrine injector. It was only a few feet away. But it might as well have been across the street. Derek leaned against the wall with his phone raised. "You've got to be kidding me." His camera pointed directly at Annita. "If she's going to put on a show, somebody should record it." One of Annita's cousins looked uncomfortable. "Derek, maybe stop recording." "For what?" He shrugged. "So when she claims we ignored her, we'll have proof." Gloria nodded approvingly. "Exactly." Another aunt whispered, "She doesn't look right." Gloria answered before anyone else could. "Don't encourage her." The room divided in seconds. Some relatives wanted to help. Others remained frozen, waiting for Gloria to tell them what to do. For years, her opinion had settled every disagreement in the family. Old habits were difficult to break. Anita's breathing became louder. Each gasp was shorter than the last. A harsh wheezing sound echoed through the hallway. Her vision blurred. The edges of the room darkened. She could hear Ethan arguing now. "I'm calling 911. Gloria reached for his arm. "No." He pulled away. "I'm not watching my wife die because you think she's pretending." For the first time all evening, his voice was louder than his mother's. Before he could reach his phone, the front door opened. A neighbor hurried inside. "I already called," she said breathlessly. "I heard yelling from next door." Seconds later, distant sirens filled the street. The paramedics entered at a run. The lead paramedic dropped to one knee beside Annita. 32-year-old female. Ethan nodded frantically. "Yes, severe tree nut allergy." "When did this start?" "About 5 minutes ago." The paramedic looked at Anita's face. Her lips had turned a dusky purple. Her eyelids were swollen. The muscles in her neck strained with every attempt to breathe. "This isn't a panic attack," he said firmly. "Epinephrine now." His partner administered the injection, while oxygen was placed over Anita's face. Within moments, another paramedic attached monitoring equipment. The hallway transformed from family dining room to emergency treatment area. Everyone suddenly fell silent. The lead paramedic stood and faced Gloria. Who prepared dinner? I did. Did you know she has a severe allergy? Gloria gave an impatient sigh. She claims she does. The paramedic frowned. Claims? She's always dramatic. He looked back toward Annita. Her condition spoke for itself. Then his eyes drifted across the dining room. One plate had barely been touched. The serving bowl beside it caught his attention. He turned back to the family. What exactly did she eat? 4 people answered at once. Chicken. Roast. Homemade sauce. No sauce. The conflicting responses hung in the air. The paramedic didn't say anything for several seconds. Instead, he quietly memorized every answer. A police cruiser rolled into the driveway just as the stretcher was brought inside. 2 officers entered without urgency, but with careful attention. One officer approached the paramedic. You requested assistance. Yes. The paramedic lowered his voice. Known life-threatening allergy. He glanced toward Gloria before continuing. Family delayed emergency care. He nodded toward the dining table. And someone reminded them about the allergy before dinner. The officer's expression changed. Without saying another word, he walked to the dining room. He pulled on a pair of evidence gloves. Every conversation in the house stopped. Gloria took one uneasy step forward. What are you doing? The officer carefully lifted the remaining food container, sealed it inside an evidence bag, and handed it to his partner. No one laughed anymore. No one called Annita dramatic. For the first time that evening, Gloria's confidence faltered as she watched the officers carry the meal out of her house. The emergency room doors burst open as the stretcher rolled inside. Severe anaphylaxis, the lead paramedic reported while keeping pace. Known tree nut allergy, epinephrine administered in the field after delayed treatment. Oxygen saturation dropped into the low 80s before intervention. A team of physicians and nurses immediately surrounded Annita. Move her to Bay 3. Start another IV. Prepare a second dose if the swelling doesn't improve. Ethan was stopped outside the treatment area. He watched helplessly through the glass as doctors worked quickly around his wife. For the first time since dinner began, he wasn't listening to his mother. He was listening to the steady rhythm of medical professionals fighting to save Annita's life. Nearly 40 minutes later, the attending physician stepped into the waiting area. She's stable. Ethan exhaled so sharply that his knees nearly gave out. But, the doctor continued, she came dangerously close to complete airway obstruction. Had treatment been delayed much longer, this could have ended very differently. Gloria folded her arms. So she's fine. The physician looked directly at her. No. His voice was calm, but unmistakably firm. She's alive. There was a significant difference. Down the hall, 2 detectives had already arrived. The responding officers from the house handed over their notes. So everyone knew about the allergy. Every witness has confirmed that. And emergency care was delayed. Several witnesses said the victim repeatedly tried to reach her emergency medication, while family members argued. The detective closed his notebook. Let's start taking statements separately. The interviews began. Without Gloria directing the conversation, the family's stories started falling apart. Derek insisted Annita had overreacted. But you recorded the incident, a detective asked. Yeah. Why? He hesitated. I thought she'd get up. Instead, you kept filming while she struggled to breathe. His confidence disappeared. I didn't think it was real. Aunt Linda's interview told a different story. I reminded Gloria before dinner. What did you remind her of? Annita's allergy. And Gloria's response. Linda looked down. She rolled her eyes. What exactly did she say? Linda swallowed. She said, "If we keep treating her like she's fragile, she'll never stop making everything about herself." The detective wrote every word. Meanwhile, hospital staff completed Annita's medical evaluation. The physician documented extensive swelling consistent with severe anaphylaxis. There was nothing to suggest anxiety, nothing to suggest exaggeration, nothing that supported Gloria's repeated claims. Another doctor quietly added a note to the chart. Delayed administration of emergency medication likely increased the severity of the reaction. That sentence would become far more important than anyone realized. The lead paramedic was then asked to explain why he'd requested police at what initially appeared to be a medical emergency. He answered without hesitation. "I've responded to allergic reactions for nearly 15 years. What stood out? The patient couldn't breathe." He paused. The people around her weren't trying to help. He continued carefully. They repeatedly minimized obvious medical distress, discouraged emergency treatment, and gave conflicting explanations about the source of exposure. The detective nodded. "So your concern wasn't just the allergic reaction?" "No. My concern was that the circumstances surrounding it didn't make sense." Ethan sat alone in the waiting room, replaying every moment. Annita reaching for her purse. His mother stopping him. Derek laughing. The neighbor calling for help. He buried his face in his hands. I should have believed her. Across the room, Gloria remained defiant. "They're blowing this completely out of proportion." No one answered. For the first time in years, no relative rushed to defend her. Even Derek stared silently at the floor. One detective approached him. "We'll need the video you recorded." Derek looked up. "My video. It captured the incident." He slowly unlocked his phone. As he replayed the recording, his own voice filled the waiting room. "She's just looking for sympathy." Then Gloria's voice. "Nobody is calling an ambulance over another one of your episodes." The recording continued as Anita's breathing became weaker with every passing second. Derek stopped the video before it reached the paramedics. His face had turned pale. He couldn't finish the sentence. He handed the phone to the detective without another word. Almost an hour later, another detective walked briskly down the corridor carrying a sealed laboratory envelope. Everyone looked up. He glanced at the physician, then at his partner. Finally, he broke the silence. "The test results are back." The waiting room fell completely silent. The detective opened the laboratory envelope and removed a single report. He read it once himself before looking at the attending physician. The food sample tested positive for a concentrated amount of tree nuts. The physician nodded slowly. "That's consistent with what we're seeing clinically." He turned toward Ethan. "Your wife's reaction wasn't caused by stress. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't an overreaction." He paused. "It was a severe allergic reaction triggered by exposure to the exact allergen listed throughout her medical records." Every eye in the room shifted toward Gloria. For the first time all night, she had nothing to say. One detective placed the report on the table. "We've also reviewed the witness statements." He looked directly at Gloria. "Multiple people confirmed you were reminded about Anita's allergy before dinner." Gloria finally spoke. "I didn't think a little bit would hurt her." The words hung in the air. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. Ethan slowly turned toward his mother. "What did you just say?" Gloria became defensive. "I was trying to prove she exaggerates everything." "You knew," Ethan whispered. "I thought she'd get a rash." "You knew." His voice cracked. "You knew, and you still served it to her." Gloria looked away. "I never wanted this to happen." The detective answered quietly. "Intent isn't the only issue." He continued carefully. "The evidence indicates you knowingly exposed someone with a documented life-threatening allergy to an allergen despite repeated warnings. He glanced toward another page in the file. And according to multiple witnesses, you discouraged anyone from calling emergency services while she was in obvious respiratory distress. The room remained motionless. We cannot conclude that you intended to kill her, the detective said. However, the evidence supports an investigation into reckless endangerment and your actions during the medical emergency. Another officer stepped forward. We'll also be forwarding the findings to the district attorney for review. Gloria's shoulders slumped. The authority she'd held over the family for decades seemed to disappear in a matter of seconds. The next morning, Annita finally opened her eyes. The swelling had begun to subside. Her throat still hurt, and every swallow reminded her how close she had come to losing her life. The physician visited her room. You were fortunate. Annita gave a faint smile. It didn't feel like luck. No, he admitted. It felt like your neighbors, and the paramedics arrived in time. She closed her eyes briefly. If the shouting hadn't reached the house next door, if the paramedics had arrived even a few minutes later. She pushed the thought away. Ethan walked into the room, carrying a bouquet of flowers. His eyes were red. He sat beside the bed, without speaking for several moments. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Annita looked at him quietly. "I should have believed you." His voice shook. "When you reached for your purse." He covered his face. "I actually stopped, because I heard my mother's voice in my head telling me you were overreacting." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "I almost let that voice become louder than yours." Annita reached over and took his hand. Neither of them tried to excuse what had happened. There wasn't an excuse, only accountability. Over the following weeks, every member of the family was interviewed again. Without Gloria directing the conversations, the truth became impossible to ignore. Aunt Linda admitted she'd seen Gloria replace the serving bowl before dinner. Another relative confirmed hearing Gloria dismissed the allergy as another one of Annita's dramatic habits. Derek voluntarily surrendered the original recording from his phone. He later visited Annita alone. "I've replayed that video 100 times. He couldn't meet her eyes. I kept laughing while you couldn't breathe." His voice broke. "I don't expect forgiveness." Annita answered honestly. "I'm not ready for that." He nodded. "I understand." Before leaving, he quietly deleted every mocking post he'd made about her over the years. It couldn't erase what happened, but it was the first time he'd accepted responsibility instead of hiding behind a joke. Months later, the legal process reached its conclusion. Authorities moved forward with charges related to reckless endangerment and interference during a medical emergency. Civil proceedings followed, covering Annita's medical expenses and the lasting impact of the incident. Gloria was no longer the unquestioned center of every family gathering. Relatives who had once defended her began keeping their distance. Some admitted they had spent years accepting her version of every conflict without ever asking whether it was true. Her influence didn't disappear because of one mistake. It disappeared because the illusion of being right all the time had finally been shattered. Ethan made a decision that surprised everyone. He and Annita moved into a home several hours away. When relatives asked why, he answered simply, "My wife deserves to feel safe in her own family." He stopped making excuses for his mother's behavior. He stopped asking Annita to keep the peace. Instead, he learned that protecting the person you love sometimes means refusing to protect the person who hurt them. Their marriage wasn't healed overnight. Trust rarely returns that quickly. But every honest conversation, every boundary they enforced, and every decision they made together slowly replaced fear with confidence. Annita eventually returned to the hospital, where she worked as a respiratory therapist. Her experience changed the way she spoke to patients. Whenever someone apologized for making a fuss about struggling to breathe, she gently stopped them. You never need permission to take your symptoms seriously. She encouraged families to learn emergency action plans together and reminded them that allergic reactions could become life-threatening within minutes. Her coworkers noticed she spoke with a quiet conviction that hadn't been there before. Not because she had become harder, because she had finally stopped doubting herself. Looking back, Annita realized the worst part of that night wasn't the pain or even the fear. It was hearing the people closest to her dismiss her cries for help while she fought for every breath. The medical report exposed what had happened. The investigation revealed who was responsible. But the greatest change came afterward. She never again apologized for protecting her own health, trusted her own instincts over someone else's manipulation, and refused to mistake silence for peace. Because she had learned that believing yourself can sometimes be the very thing that saves your life.